The last video in this module is on the topic of the digital divide. And the digital divide refers to the inequality that exists between those who have access to internet and the services it provides and people without access. Okay, so we are talking about the gap that exists between communities who have access to internet technologies such as computers and internet and those who lack access. And so people in those communities might be more disadvantaged when it comes to, well, it could be a number of different reasons, but income is certainly one of them. And they could be more remote. They could also be influenced by things like age or education or geographic location. So really, it's about availability, affordability. I mean, let's face it, tech is expensive and all of its gadgets and internet connections and everything else, but also access to digital literacy and even gender and racial equality. So the digital divide refers to the gap or that ever-growing inequality between those who are well connected and those who are unplugged. And so there are a lot of challenges related to access. Like I just mentioned, there's affordability, there is digital literacy and cybersecurity, right? These all disproportionately affect certain communities. And those communities are Indigenous peoples, the LGBTQ plus community, racialized communities, recent immigrants, people with disabilities, seniors, and women, right? And let's think about this. If tech jobs are the future of jobs, and they say they are, they are asking for post-secondary education, right? And if that is the case, then you are already rejecting, for instance, 90% of Indigenous peoples, right? So we really have to think about what we can do in order to bridge, right, this gap. And there's no easy answer to this, but we will get to it in a little bit. So other disparities, other ways that we see gaps have to do with rural versus urban Canadians, right? So there is a digital divide that exists in our country that separates a lot of rural and urban communities. And Indigenous populations, for instance, have less access to resources. And that is because they're Northern Ontario, for instance, right? It's expansive geographically, right? It's massive, but it also has the highest percentage of Indigenous peoples in Ontario, right? So the factors then become compounded when you think of it, right? Like, what if you are a woman, and what if you are Indigenous, and what if you are youth? Well, those are right? Those are three major factors. And so then we could have all three, right? Putting them at an even greater disadvantage. So yes, the gap has serious economic and social consequences for people. And rural versus urban is just one of them. Another one is income, right? So we know that 39% of people living in Ontario with low incomes do not have internet connection at home, right? And if we look at the flip side of that coin, there's only 1% of high income Ontarians who don't have access. So that is a significant difference, right? And think about what that means to not be able to access the internet from your house. Well, 13% of adults in Canada that have household incomes below $30,000 a year do not have access to those technologies at home, right? So just taking a closer look at the numbers here, where if you have a household that's making $100,000 or more a year, only 1% of them don't have access. So again, like let's just think a minute for what that means. Well, that means that less affluent families are more likely to use cell phones for tasks that are traditionally reserved for larger screens. So, for example, smartphone owners, right? People who have lower income, they are more likely to use their mobile device when they are seeking out and applying for jobs, and also when doing school work. And it's probably not a surprise to you that it is difficult sometimes to do your studying and your work from your phone, right? It's not ideal. It's much better to have a laptop or to have, a desktop access, right? And the coronavirus pandemic really brought these disparities to light, right? They were always a problem, but when so much of our daily life went online at that time, it really shone a bright light on the obstacles that lower income families were having navigating the digital environment, and not having a computer at home, right? And the need to use a smartphone when completing schoolwork was a really big problem that came to light at that time. Both of which obviously are not ideal in any way. And when you think about it, a mobile device might be sufficient for a senior or someone who only occasionally accesses the internet, but students who only have mobile would be at a severe disadvantage, especially if they were attending a virtual class, or what if they did have a device in their household, but it had to be shared, right? So who gets access and when? So these types of things are obviously problematic. Digital inclusion refers to the efforts and the initiatives aimed at ensuring that all individuals, regardless of their socioeconomic background, their geographic location, their age, their education level, right, their abilities, that they have equitable access to internet technologies and the effective use of communication technologies, including the internet and digital devices. And the bottom line is really that we will never achieve equitable digital societies unless we address forms of social inequality, because that is really what we are talking about here. We need to improve people's access to technology, right, in the digital world. And this is not a new problem. I mean, when we look back to 1997, that's when Stats Canada first conducted the household internet use survey. And that's when it was first brought to light, and that there was a real shift in research that focused around equality and digital inclusion, right? So for over 20 years, we've known that this has been an issue. And of course, in 1997, the internet was fairly new. Only 20% of Canadians even had a cell phone at that time. But there was still a gap then, and there continues to be a gap now. But as we become more and more reliant on technology, this becomes more and more of a societal and a global issue.